So, everybody who's tuning in, can you not hear me?
It's a little, there's some background. Okay, that's better.
Let's.
Yes.
Now?
Yes.
Okay.
I can hear you now.
Okay, sorry about that. And sorry for the opening technical glitch. Oh, was that a background noise this then? Anyway, so my name is Jonathan Cohn. I'm the chair of the Issues Committee at Progressive Massachusetts, and we've been doing these series of live streams to think about both our short-term response to the ongoing pandemic and kind of looming economic recession or depression, as well as the long-term things that we need to do, and how both of them tie in with the existing inequalities that long predated this that we'll need to address. I'm delighted to have as a guest this evening Tanisha Sullivan, who's the president of the Boston Branch of the NAACP. Tanisha, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about what you do?
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you this evening. I've had the opportunity to pop into a couple of your Facebook Lives over the past few weeks. It's been actually probably one of the things that I've enjoyed doing during this time is being able to pop into the different workshops, roundtables, meetings in a way that being live doesn't always allow us to do. So thank you for creating this platform. As you mentioned, I'm the president of the NAACP Boston Branch, which is the oldest branch in the NAACP. So we have a very rich and long, deep-rooted history here in Boston, and we are particularly proud of really the legacy of advocacy and activism of the branch on issues of racial equity and racial justice, and really helping to bring about greater equality for all people here in the city of Boston. And as that resonates throughout the Commonwealth, really standing, again, for generations as one of the leaders in the fight for ultimately freedom and a deliverance on America's promise. So super happy to be here. There's a lot for us to talk about. And we're good friends, so this is going to be a great conversation.
Exactly.
They don't know.
I'll give you a shout out as well. We're talking before. I want to give Tanisha a shout out for being on Boston Magazine's list of the 100 most powerful people in Boston. And I wish you had even more power than many of that.
Well, I appreciate that. Thanks.
How would you evaluate the job of some of the other people on that list and how they're responding to this?
No, so go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, so like obviously that list will also have folks like the governor, have folks like the Speaker of the House, the mayor. How would you evaluate Boston's and Massachusetts' response so far to kind of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, again, thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate the acknowledgement. As I was sharing with you beforehand, these lists, I think that they serve a purpose, in that they, to the extent that they are lifting up not your usual suspects, I think that they serve a purpose in hopefully helping to shine a light on some of the work that's happening around the Commonwealth and in the city, and lifting up people who, might not be as familiar to folks as others. I think what's particularly important to remember is that these are lists, and at the end of the day, they're subjective, right? And so they shouldn't serve, for me anyway, they don't serve as kind of any as a defining moment, but certainly appreciative of the acknowledgement. I think it's important to note that this year's list has in the #1 slot all of us. Mm-hmm. And I think, that's important to note because of the moment we're in right now, as we are all fighting against COVID-19, the coronavirus, from a health standpoint, but also as we are all in a fight for greater equity, greater equality, and greater access for all people. And we know that the virus is particularly striking at the core of communities of color, Black and Brown folks, and of our working class families. And it is truly going to take all of us to get through this. And I think, so if I'm responding to your question, I think the first slot is dead on, right? Because I think, all of us really are in this. And I think, what we've been able to see in the Commonwealth, not just, as we're moving toward a flattening of the curve, we're actually starting to bend the curve. And we all have had a hand in that. Now, the virus and this pandemic is also, I think, giving us an opportunity to really see what leadership means. And so to that point, we start going down the list. And, I think, what I'm particularly proud of in this moment for us as a community, as a city, and as a Commonwealth is that I think that, we have demonstrated collectively strong leadership in this moment. Now, that's not to say that there haven't been missteps. And, part of what has, kept me up over the past 6 weeks and just, feeling like the days are running together is, trying to make sure that we are certainly being supportive of the work that's happening by our municipal and state leaders, but also making sure that to the extent there are blind spots, that we are amplifying those so that we can correct them in the moment. No one is expecting perfection, especially in a time like this, but what we are expecting is that decisions that are made are thoughtful, that they are data driven, and that they are people focused. And so, I would say that, our leaders here in the Commonwealth and in Greater Boston, both those who are elected and appointed, as well as civic leaders and business leaders, I think that we have collectively really made, I think, great attempts to help us all get through this time.
Mm-hmm. Thinking, you were just talking about data driven, which is a great point. And one thing that I was thinking about before this call was about the statistics showing about the racial disparities in the cases for coronavirus and the deaths. If you want to talk a little bit about how that's hitting communities differently.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, early on, we, along with others, I think, we've seen it at all levels of our government, identified the need for us to have data to help drive our decisions. What we know is that when it comes to the allocation of resources, whether we're talking about a ventilator or we're talking about food resources or other health resources, those resources are allocated based on data. And so based on the reports we were seeing from around the world, but certainly in other parts of the country, what we knew was that this virus was, from a health standpoint, hitting the Black community particularly hard because of some of the underlying pre-existing conditions that Black folks have been struggling with, for centuries, for generations. And we can take that back to its roots, which are truly systemic racism. And just to, in case people are curious, how does this tie to racism? What we know is that during slavery, and through Jim Crow, and up through the civil rights movement, even to today, the access to high quality healthcare, the access to quality food in our communities, the access to certainly economic stability that is a gateway for so many families, has not been readily available to Black folks. And that was part of kind of how things were designed to be. And so it is no wonder that for generations, our community, by no fault of our own, has suffered disproportionately from some of the conditions that have been identified as pre-existing conditions for coronavirus that lead to the likelihood that one would be hospitalized and lead to the increased likelihood that, that the fate could be mortal. And so we knew that data was going to be critically important. We certainly want to lift up the work that Congresswoman Presley has done nationally on this front, and also the work that so many of the members of our state legislators have done on this front. Our Black and Latino caucus were really leading the fight on this issue at the state level. We knew it was going to be critically important to get the data, because what we know from doing this work, this civil rights work, this social justice work, is that, you know, it's not enough for us to say, you know, to be the canaries in the mine, if you will, and say we've got a problem. What we've learned, you know, through generations of advocacy is that if we don't have the data, the evidence, the receipts to back it up, that we are not going to see the type of movement and action that we want to see. And so we're very certainly pleased to see some of the progress that has been made on the city level, on the state level, and we're moving there on the federal level to ensure that we are collecting racial, ethnic, and gender data as it relates to the impact of the coronavirus. Now, why is that important? Certainly in the moment, it's important that we understand, you know, kind of who is impacted and how, but it is also going, and therefore, you know, how people, who gets treated and when, and what that treatment looks like. But it's also important for the recovery and reconstruction phases of this pandemic, right? And so when the time comes, once again, for us to put in place policies and put in place programs for the other side of this, we know that the decisions will be made by and large based on the data. And if we find that they're not being made by and large based on the data, we want to have the data in hand to be able to support our advocacy. So having this data is not just about, you know, trying to make this a race issue. Having this data really is, at the end of the day, about saving lives today and helping to ensure that all of us have the opportunity to thrive after we get through this pandemic.
And I think that focus on data is an excellent point, because for the fact that you can't really solve a problem that you don't see and are not willing to see, and data helps to shine a light on that.
Absolutely. And you know, what's interesting to me, Jonathan, during this time is that, you know, again, we, along, you know, as NAACP, along with so many of our, you know, allies and co-conspirators in this work, you know, whether it's the ACLU or the Lawyers for Civil Rights or Progressive Mass, or so many of our collaborators in this work, we know these issues, right? And what has been striking to me is, in this moment, how many people are awakening to the issues, right? So when we start to talk about, you know, distance learning, for example, and the need for, I actually like to call it learning continuity, you know, and the need for us to make sure that, you know, that districts across the Commonwealth have in place learning continuity strategies for their students, and not just students, period, making sure that it's differentiated for students with disabilities and ELs and students who are sitting in our achievement and opportunity gaps. People are like, oh, there's an issue there? Oh, students don't all have, you know, laptops and Wi-Fi, you know, oh, students are relying and families are relying on, you know, schools to feed their children, you know, upwards of twice a day. And, you know, it's striking, I have to say, because, you know, we sit in these meetings, we sit on these commissions and these task forces, and I'm like, we've been saying this for a very long time.
Yeah.
I know we're on this issue, right? But what I will say is, you know, it is, in some respects, that's an opportunity, right? We have now an opportunity to really bring more people into this work around educational equity. We have an opportunity to bring more people into the health equity work that we're doing. You know, folks are like, why are Black people more susceptible? Oh, you know, and they want to learn more. And so, you know, it is up to us, you know, those of us who are in this work, the civil rights and social justice work, to not just sit in this moment and think about the things that are not happening. I think it is incumbent upon us to be in this moment and to really use it as an opportunity to bring more people into this work, because the more people who have the opportunity to understand really, you know, up close and personal, these issues and how important they are, not just to Black and Brown people, not just to our AAPI brothers and sisters, but to working class families, to families living in poverty, and with that, all of us.
Yeah, I think at the education point, that it really does shine a new light on education inequities, because we think of all students in a classroom, like the equalizing potential or promise of a classroom is wonderful, but it also ends up having like a dissembling effect, where if you're seeing all the kids in that classroom together, it's easy to think, well, why can't they all do this, right? Whereas in the moment we're now, it's saying like, oh, you realize how the home environment, the economic situation that people have, the instability that they might live in, oh yeah, that has a major effect. And if you're not developing both your educational policies with that in mind, and if you aren't realizing that addressing income inequality and poverty and all of those other forces are essential to addressing like educational inequities, you'll end up falling short.
Absolutely. You know, and so this idea that we would, you know, send kids home with a Chromebook, you know, pray that they have appropriate Wi-Fi access, and, you know, give parents a packet of material and say, go for it, you know, and wonder why kids aren't logging on, or wonder why, you know, parents aren't, you know, as engaged with their children as they should be, without understanding that, particularly for our urban school districts, and our school districts in rural communities across the Commonwealth, you know, it's not that easy. You know, a lot of parents who have children, especially younger children in public schools, are parents who are our essential workers, you know, who are our frontline workers. They are our bus drivers. They are our grocery store workers. They are, you know, they are working at the restaurant that you're ordering takeout from. And so while you're working from home, they are actually still getting up every day, getting on maybe public transportation or getting in their car, driving to a location while their children are home, trying to figure this education thing out on their own. And so in some respects, I think this moment is also an opportunity for us to all reflect on our privilege, all check our bias when it comes to parents, and particularly parents who, you know, are working class, parents, again, who, you know, have children in urban school districts and who have children in rural districts, because we sometimes forget about the rural districts as well, you know, who are managing more than just, you know, again, working from home and a child popping into a Zoom meeting. You know, we've got parents who are not able to be home, because if they're not home, then the bills don't get paid. And what we know is that the bills have not stopped coming because the coronavirus is here. And so, you know, certainly the educational equity issues are amplified in this moment. I do think this is an opportunity for us to really rethink what public education looks like. You know, at the end of the day, the walls are down.
Yeah.
You know, like literally, there are no longer walls for our schoolhouses. And so I think this is an opportunity for us to rethink what learning looks like in public education. And quite frankly, I think it would be a missed opportunity for us if we don't. So how do we think about learning for young people, you know, from a digital standpoint, from a distance learning standpoint? How do we think about learning for young people outside of the classroom, who are the teachers? You know, it's not just the educators who have traditionally been in the classroom, and it's also not just, you know, the parents. You know, what about this idea that community can serve as the educators for our children? And in that sense, we all are taking responsibility for making sure that they have access to high quality. So I am in this moment, I have to say I'm concerned about what we're seeing with public education. I'm very concerned that we are leaving behind once again our children who have been failed by public education and are stuck with this persistent achievement and opportunity gap, our students with disabilities and our EL. That being said, you know, I do believe there's an opportunity for us to turn this around. We need to make sure that that our children are not going 6 months without, you know, true learning happening, without growth happening in the learning process. And in order to do that, it is going to take all of us to get in the mix on this and not, you know, just expect the schools and the educators to get it done or the parents to get it done, but really for all of us as a community to figure out what can we contribute to the learning process for our children.
Yes. So I'm going to touch on a point that you mentioned a little while ago when you were talking about the recovery and reconstruction that needs to happen afterwards. How would you define two different words, somewhat similar on surface level, but they do convey different things? So how would you describe the dynamic between those two and what we need to do going forward?
Absolutely. I think, you know, it is when we hear conversations both nationally at state level and municipal level about this virus, we oftentimes hear about the relief of right now and the recovery of later. Within the NAACP, what we really try to tie together are recovery and reconstruction. You know, yes, there needs to be relief in the right now, but as we're looking forward, thinking about both recovery and reconstruction. The reality is, you know, recovery is about putting the pieces back together again the way they were, you know, and what we know, particularly for, again, some of our most vulnerable populations and for working class families that are the majority of this country, putting the pieces of the puzzle back together means going back to old systems that weren't working for us anyway. And so what we like to talk about is recovery and reconstruction, because we believe that there's an opportunity in this moment, you know, to rebuild in a way that is different from what we had before and that works for more people. You know, and we recognize that that's not going to be easy because there are a lot of people and there's a lot of power that would like for things to be put back the way they were. You know, and I was sharing earlier, you know, that, you know, people like to think of this like Humpty Dumpty, you know, and they want to put the pieces back together again the way it was. Well, the thing was broken before. You know, and the thing wasn't working before. And so how do we, in this moment, you know, leave some things on the floor? You know, coronavirus has, you know, wiped some systems out, completely disrupted some systems. As we're thinking about rebuilding, we should be reconstructing systems in a way that they are better than they were before COVID-19. And so that's what we're advocating for. And in order to get that done, Jonathan, it is critically important that in, you know, traditional halls of power, so, you know, in our federal government and in our state government and in our city government, that those tables are inclusive, and that as we kind of on the outside are advocating, that we are advocating for more inclusion of different voices in designing the plans for recovery and reconstruction. So that's part of what we've been actively engaged in and really trying to create space for more inclusion, you know, racial and ethnic, gender, but also just different representation of different sectors of our community. And, we're pleased, one of the areas that we were concerned about was at the state level, and we're pleased that there have been, in the past, I'd probably say 7 to 10 days, some changes made on the state level with respect to the coronavirus advisory task force and expanding the diversity on that. And then also you saw today the governor announced his recovery task force. And there's greater diversity there. So what we feel like is, that the message is resonating. And again, people are trying to do better. The reality is leadership is hard. We all have blind spots. We don't, none of us knows everything. And so, for us, the barometer is, are you open? And when we raise an issue, are you open to change? Are you open to doing something different? So we're hopeful on that front.
Yeah, as we were talking earlier, I really liked that kind of the Humpty Dumpty analogy, because when I think about that is that the problem with Humpty Dumpty is that he's an egg. And then an egg has a very thin shell. And if you put all those pieces of Humpty Dumpty back together again, you know what an egg's gonna do? It's gonna break. And unless you're dealing with the fact that that has a thin shell, it's gonna break again.
That's right. And absolutely. And we do, Jonathan, for as much pain as is in this moment. And, certainly our hearts go out to the families that are experiencing loss at this time, both, the loss of loved ones, as well as, the loss of, friends and family. There are opportunities here for all of us to benefit from this moment and in a way that has generational impact. In a way, in so many respects, this is a defining moment for us. This is our moment. And there are going to be, many case studies on this moment, many books written about this moment. It is my hope that, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, when our children, our great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren are looking back, they're able to say that we are better as a community, we're better as a society because of some of the decisions we made in this moment. That we didn't take the easy way out, right? The easy way out is to just simply do the recovery thing, put the thing back the way it was. That's the easy work. The really tough work, the hard work, the intellectually challenging work in this moment, the politically challenging work in this moment is to dare to do something different. And to dare to really, take a moonshot in this moment. So that, again, we are all better for it. I've been struck by some of the reports we've heard globally about the impact of this virus on our climate. And, how, the result of us all being, either whether we're sheltering in place or we're staying home, responding to advisories, regardless of it, we have stopped driving as much. Some reports are saying, the air is clearer, in this moment, that from an environmental standpoint, we're actually seeing great progress. It makes me wonder, again, how can we, take some of the learnings in this moment and continue, some of our ways of working going forward. Do we all really need to be, driving or in a bus, on a train to a building, to sit in a cube or to sit in an office, right? In order to say that we're present to get things done? Or, is there an opportunity for us to rethink how we work so that we can have a more positive impact on our environment? And potentially, save some years here for the betterment of, of our world. So I do think And I know that I'm not alone in this. We're here. There are many op-eds that have been written. There's a lot of advocacy happening, but I cannot in this moment really discount the power that we're up against. Jonathan.
Yeah.
That whenever you're talking about systems change.
Yeah.
There are powers in place that thrive on the systems as they are. And so, in order to really see the type of change that we believe is possible in this moment, we are all going to have to work together. And we're going to have to break down silos. We're going to have to, egos will need to be checked. We are really going to need to invite more people in, because we are going to need an army to really push through the power structure to make sure that we realize the type of systems change that is possible in this moment.
It reminds me of one favorite quote from mine. I know it's a favorite quote of one of our mutual friends, Lisa Green, because it's often used by Don Berwick, who founded IHI, where she worked, and he had run for governor before, that every system is perfectly designed for the results that it produces.
Absolutely.
Which is always an important thing to keep in mind.
Absolutely. Systems, they do what they are designed to do. Absolutely. And so, we are, again, there's a benefit in this moment because so many systems have been disrupted. But another quote, right? Power conceives nothing without a demand.
Exactly.
Douglas, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not, their power structures are not going to let go easily. And so I'm hopeful that we will continue to be able to build coalitions, that will continue to be able to come together to be a part of the reconstruction of America, the reconstruction of the Commonwealth, and the reconstruction of the city of Boston.
Yes. Are there any good, creative ideas that you're seeing out there, or policies that you specifically want to champion that really need to be things that we make sure that we talk about during that process?
Yeah, I mean, across the board, one of the things that, is unique about the NAACP is that, our mandate is pretty broad. We really work across a number of issue areas. So from economic opportunity to education, environmental, climate justice, health, criminal justice, political action, and civic engagement, right? And so in each of those, there are opportunities to do things differently. In criminal justice, I think what we're seeing with some of the decarceration efforts coming out of COVID-19 is really this question about, do people really need to be in jail? Do people really need to be incarcerated at the rates at which they are incarcerated? Are there ways for us to think about pre-trial detention in a different way? Are there opportunities for us to rethink our judicial system, generally speaking? I know, my good friend, my sister, our district attorney here in Suffolk County, Rachel Rollins, is really leading the effort for us to rethink how we do criminal justice and how we do public safety. This is not about, simply just, saying that there should be no law and order, which is how some people might want to frame it. But it is about, really, rethinking how we get to enforcement of law and order. Additionally, access to healthcare. This moment is also showing us, that telehealth, which is something that we've been, there's been a lot of advocacy around telehealth for several years. And it has consistently, been beat back by, insurance companies and others who have an interest in having people go into buildings and pay more. What this moment is teaching us is that, again, there are opportunities for us to create greater access to high quality healthcare if we use tools like the one you and I are using now, right? And in that sense, we can reach more people and keep more people healthy, so that they're less susceptible to some of these issues, these underlying conditions that we're learning so much about now. And so again, within our healthcare system, rethinking access. There's an opportunity there. These are policy decisions that are made. And, I'm hopeful that, again, that we'll keep some of this. We're also, the other piece, and I know you've seen this, when it has come to testing, we're testing everybody and the testing is for free. Okay, yeah. We figured out a way to make that happen, Jonathan, and that's across the aisle, so the things that people have said before could not be done. What we're seeing is that they are absolutely possible. The thing that has stood in our way for so long is a lack of will. And so again, thinking about economic opportunity, as I mentioned, rethinking how people do the work that they do. Are there ways to work differently that has both, that is economically beneficial and helpful to our environment? Thinking about in this moment, I think what has been amplified significantly is this issue we're seeing with the lack of resources and really how fragile so many of our small and micro businesses are in communities of color. And so thinking about how we shore those up and create better structures around our small and micro businesses so that they can become stronger. That includes, rethinking what is a small business. A lot of people were surprised to see, how many businesses got access to the PPP, how many businesses have been able to take advantage of some of the small business programs and scratching their heads like, wow, how did they end up a small business? It all comes down to a definition, so rethinking, what or recasting the definitions from a legislative standpoint, from a policy standpoint, it could be incredibly helpful and quite frankly could be a game changer. The list goes on. I mentioned education, that's an issue that is near and dear to my heart because of how instrumental I know it has been in my life. And education, there's a list of things that we could be doing differently. It makes me wonder, in this moment, why aren't we leveraging the opportunity to have more educators, providing more educators with the opportunity to reach more kids. We have some phenomenal educators in the Commonwealth who have been bound by geography. Yeah. What would it look like if we, created a core of our best and brightest, most talented educators across the Commonwealth to help educate our children in this moment, right? Why aren't we thinking about that? Why aren't we doing that? And for educators who are dynamic in that way, what I know about them is that they love children. And the reason they're doing this work is because they care about the development of young people, about the learning process for young people. And so it's hard for me to imagine them not wanting, to share, their talent with children from across the Commonwealth in this moment. So there are many things we could be doing differently. I think, in this moment, I also think it's important for us to be mindful of not just the potential impact of this virus on our elections, our upcoming elections, but also, again, thinking about this virus in terms of, what could we be doing different now that could be sustainable later? We have been advocating here in the Commonwealth for election day registration for I don't know how long. Right? It seems like forever. We've been advocating for expansion of mail-in ballots, the opportunity to mail in ballots forever. Now is the moment. Why wouldn't we, with great ease, decide to adopt, the option for folks to mail in their ballots? Why does that have to be an uphill battle? Why aren't we just doing that in this moment? Same day election registration, election day registration. There's an opportunity for us to quite frankly, in this moment, when certainly we are in an election year of great consequence. And I think there's a heightened interest and awareness by people about our electoral system in this moment. What better moment for us than to have a robust, election reform that is, led by just a coalition of leaders, elected as well as others, in this moment, to make our elections more accessible, to make our elections more fair, and to make our elections more inclusive. It is striking to me that we have so many folks who, are registered to vote, who are not voting, which says that, they just don't see how their vote is going to make a difference. My sister, Julia Mejia here in Boston has, she is famous, right, for the one vote and the power of the one vote. But truly, Councilwoman, Councilor Mejia, her election and really the symbolism of her winning by one vote it's what got attention in this moment, but that happens all the time. Each of our votes matters. And, it makes a difference, how people vote. I mean, how, when we vote, by how much someone, is elected into office. DA Rollins talks about that all the time. She had a mandate going in, which has allowed her, in this moment, to be able to push forward some of the reforms that she has, because she knows she's operating with a mandate. And so our votes do matter. And so figuring out how we can make elections more inclusive in this time, I think is critically important as well. Bottom line for me, for us, Jonathan, is that we can't afford to play it small in this moment. We really need to go big. And again, as they say, the walls are all down. We are we have so many directions we can go in. We really should challenge ourselves collectively, not to think within the boxes and the silos that we've always operated in. Now is the moment to really be bold, to go big, to take some risk. To step out there and not quite know how something's gonna work out, but make sure that, that if we are armed with data, and that we are strategic in our thinking, that we're gonna go for it. Because again, as I said earlier, I do think this is a defining moment for us as a nation, as a Commonwealth, as a city, and we can miss it. So I'm hopeful, again, that people, even in the midst of the tragedy that's happening now, even in the midst of the loss that's happening now, I'm hopeful that that leaders are rising up, and that folks are, really trying to stretch where we are, so that we can truly be, what we're capable of being.
And then just to piggyback on some of the things you were just saying, with election day registration, what I keep thinking about is all of the voter registration drives that would have been happening now in summer, those can't happen. So it shows why having that option is so important. That to make sure that you are saying that you are making elections as inclusive as possible, because everybody who meets basic qualifications and is living there when the elections happens is a member of the community and should be treated like a member of the community.
Right, exactly. And automatic voter registration is not enough. And so, right, and I'm a big proponent of this, Jonathan. Look, I'd rather have more opportunities for people to be able to participate in really one of the fundamental core components of our democracy, and that is voting, then less. Some people might say, well, we have enough, we have all these other options, why do we need that? There's nothing wrong with having more. And quite frankly, some of the objections people might say, voter fraud or what have you. I'm a firm believer that particularly here in the Commonwealth, we are well equipped with all of the talent, all of the resources, right? All of the good thought leaders, all the good thinking, to make sure that we have safe, fair, open, inclusive elections. And that we should be, again, looking for as many opportunities as possible to bring people into the process. I think, it's one of the reasons why people, aren't voting, because they just don't feel like their voices are heard. But if there were more of us voting, if there were more of us who had that opportunity to vote, then we'd really be able to see the impact of our collective vote. So again, I think that there's another opportunity for us here in this moment, to advance some of the, to advance it as it relates to our elections process, so that we can be a stronger Commonwealth when we get through this. It is, I would say, this is tough. Again, because there are so many people and so many systems that are getting tired in this moment, right? We've been battling for almost 6 weeks now, and people are tired. And so the thought of, having to put more energy and more thought into recovery and reconstruction, for some people, is like, let's just get businesses open. And whatever the quickest way is to do that, let's do that. Rather than being intentional and thoughtful about how we do it better, how we rebuild these systems in a better way.
I think earlier when you were talking about decarceration as an issue, as we're thinking about like do people really need to be kind of housed in these facilities, is how much it's put in sharp relief that these were already unsafe conditions that people were held in prison. And during a pandemic, that just becomes all of the more dangerous of that kind of those conditions, and what that kind of should really make people think about the criminal justice system more broadly.
Absolutely. The work around decarceration, I think is going to be helped through this moment, because again, it really is causing us, and not just here in the Commonwealth, I mean, we're seeing it all over the country, really causing us to take a closer look at what's happening in our facilities today, and, really helping us to get a better understanding of the health conditions within our facilities, as well as the safety conditions within our facilities, again, that have been there. But in addition to that, this moment is helping us to, again, rethink, who needs to be here, right? We're in a crisis. Who needs to be here? And it's, no one is, advocating, at least from an NAACP standpoint, that there not be accountability for wrongdoing. What we advocate for is what's fair, what's reasonable, and what's safe. And so again, in this moment, really thinking about who needs to be there, and from a public health standpoint, how would we be best served as a society in this moment when we're thinking about our incarceration policies.
And then your point about as we think now about what is essential, makes me think about when we have all the people labeled essential workers, and some of the essential workers are, let's say, the grocery store clerks in the world, or let's say some of the bus drivers and other positions that are often underpaid. And it makes really kind of puts into perspective how so much of the essential work that keeps the economy running and keeps all of these moving parts and gives us the ability to live in a society are not nearly as do not nearly get as much value attributed to them as they really do contribute.
Jonathan, absolutely. I think, one of the things that was most concerning to us early on was not only about the wages that folks were earning in these essential roles, but also the lack of really, apparently, their health protection. And what I mean by that is, early on, you'll recall, you go in the grocery store and, there were no masks, there was no plastic up, there were no gloves. And, we've received reports here with the NAACP, where, you know, some of our grocery store workers and other frontline workers were told by management that they couldn't wear some of these protective items. And so, you know, it also speaks to how we value one another, right? It's what we're seeing is how we value the lives of each other, how we value the contributions of one another. You know, and unfortunately, you know, the story is not that great when it comes to some of our frontline workers. Now, you know, we've done a great job, I think, you know, as a nation, really lifting up, you know, our doctors and our nurses, as well we should. We haven't done so great a job of lifting up the folks who are cleaning the rooms at these hospitals, or serving the food in these hospitals, or changing the bedpans in these hospitals. Haven't done such a good job at that. Or in our nursing homes or our long-term care facilities. We haven't done such a good job at lifting up, you know, our, you know, MBTA workers who are still on the job, for those who do need to get to and from work, the workplace, I should say, you know, or our postal workers. Those of us who are able to work from home, you know, are incredibly fortunate, and we would not be in this position if it were not for, you know, those who are beyond essential, those who are really keeping this country moving today. And so we do need to really take another look at, you know, the minimum wage. I like to say it needs to be a living wage, and making sure that folks are being paid for the value of their work, and also, you know, looking again at workplace conditions. You know, it's one of the reasons why they can say what you want, but it's one of the reasons why the work of our unions is so important. You know, within the NAACP, one of the things that we talk about is the very close connection between the civil rights movement and the workers' rights movement. The very close connection between us as an association, NAACP, and our unions, because what we know is that when it comes to many of these positions, the positions that tend to be, you know, the hourly positions and the lower wage positions, the positions that put people in the greatest harm, in the way of the greatest harm, you know, so many of them look like us. They're people of color, they're immigrants, you know, they're folks who have historically been marginalized. And so, you know, the work of our unions in this moment is particularly important. And as in NAACP, you know, we have consistently supported that work to make sure, again, that folks are getting, you know, access to a living wage, and that the working conditions are healthy. You know, fortunately, we're now to the point where, you know, many of our grocery workers and others and our MBTA drivers, the working conditions have improved, but I still see our postal workers, you know, here, you know, walking the streets and, you know, without PPE, you know, a lot of acronyms these days, without PPE, you know, but, you know, it's, there's a lot of work for us to do. I'm just hopeful that we don't, you know, and a lot of people saying, oh, we wish it wasn't like this, you know, and what I say to folks when they say that to me, particularly those who are in the position to make a difference, people who sit in positions of power, I say, well, let's not forget about this. You know, you wish you could do something different. Well, you can. You can start today doing something different. And maybe we won't see the fruit of that, but generations from now, they will. So it's about planting seeds today, because we're seeing that we need to do things differently, again, so that future generations can reap the benefit.
No, when you briefly said like like the PPP there, just reminded me of like I've seen reports about with like the government's like small business loan program coming out, that it ends up has been giving the loans predominantly to like white affluent business owners. And so the importance of, as you've talked about, that if you aren't building that kind of by design kind of equity into the response, it's not gonna end up there on its own.
That's right. That's right. And one of the things that we think, because whenever I see a problem, I want to understand like what's the root of the problem. It's not just about saying that, or the data showing us that our businesses of color, women-owned businesses, were not able to access the PPP. What I want to know is why. Mm-hmm. And there are many reasons why. Certainly one is because there was not an intentional carve out for those businesses. But the other piece the other data point that has become more clear to us is that, many of our businesses are micro, so they're very, very small businesses. And it reminds me, I share with people oftentimes, my mom has been an entrepreneur almost all of my life. And I used to call her, an entrepreneur by necessity. She was a micro entrepreneur, right? Just trying to make a living. And what happens oftentimes with many of those types of entrepreneurs and those types of businesses is that they don't have the support structure, like the support team around them. So they don't have the ready access to the lawyer. They don't necessarily have the strong banking relationship. They don't necessarily have the accountant on speed dial. And so when you are in crisis, and you have literally a competition to the funds, the team is not in place. And so you literally have one person, or maybe two if you're lucky, trying to weave through regulations, trying to figure out how to access the money. And because they don't have the team or access to the structure around them to get them in line, in many respects, to access this money, they end up losing out. It's not that they're not worthy. It's not that they don't deserve it, or quite frankly, don't need it more than those that received it. But it's in this moment, what has been amplified, again, trying to get to the root of the issue here, is yes, the legislation needs to be more intentional and more direct in calling out support. But we also need to think about how we build up structures around these businesses, particularly the micro businesses, particularly the Black and brown and women-owned businesses, to make sure that they have what they need to be more agile in moments like this.
It's a great point. And so since I like to keep these to about an hour, final takeaways, final comments for those viewing now or viewing later.
Well, again, Jonathan, thank you for the opportunity to join you. It's always a great conversation, and certainly in this moment, it's particularly important, I think, that we continue to lift up the issues around equity, access, and inclusion. We cannot say it enough because, again, as we are moving through the crisis and really focusing on certainly the relief in this moment, we cannot lose sight of what is to come with respect to recovery and reconstruction. And so I just hope that folks, wherever you are, whoever you're talking with, as we are thinking about what comes next, that we all continue to really believe that that we can come out of this thing different, that we can come out of this better, and that we advocate for that, and that we demand that of ourselves and of our community. That this is not just about, as we said, putting the pieces back together again, but this is really about, being bold in this moment, taking moonshots, living up to our values, and rebuilding, reconstructing a system that is better than the one we had in January of 2020. And so we continue to be here as an NAACP. We welcome people to join us, individuals and organizations to join us in this work. We do believe that we're stronger together. We need more collaborators and co-conspirators. And so I hope that folks will visit us at naacpboston.com to learn more about what we're doing. We have a pretty big summit coming up on Saturday, May 2nd. It's a virtual summit, and so folks can learn more about that summit on our website, naacpboston.com, and hope folks will join us. Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you again so much. It's always a pleasure. And thank you to everybody watching now or watching later. Yeah, and thank you for all the great work that you and the NAACP do here in Boston as well as nationally.
Thanks, Jonathan. Bye.